Welcome back to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Stacey Delicat, and thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. We are following the developing news out of Wisconsin, where today 13-year-old Jayme was found. She was rescued. She had been missing, as I said, for 3 months. Her parents were found killed. Authorities spanned out all over the country trying to find this young girl. Today they did. Well, they also arrested a suspect in her disappearance, 21-year-old Jake Patterson. Jayme was found, there you see the suspect on your screen, was found in a neighborhood in northwest Wisconsin, about an hour's drive from her home, which was in Barron, Wisconsin. So how was she found? Well, she apparently escaped from the house where she was being held, managed to flag down a neighbor who was walking her dog. That neighbor, Gene Nutter, immediately took her to another neighbor's home, the Kasinka's home. They called 911 and got her help, and now she is safe. And again, the suspect charged in her disappearance and her parents' murder, now in police custody. We did get a chance to speak to those people who helped rescue her earlier today. Listen to how they described the encounter.
When I saw her, I knew she was in trouble because I knew wherever she came from, she left in a hurry. I didn't know if somebody had just dropped her off, or because she just had on a sweatshirt and leggings and shoes that were too big for her.
My first thoughts were I basically went into shock. I mean, it was like I was literally seeing a ghost. We've seen pictures and TV ads and all this stuff, and to have her come in the house and say, "This is Jayme, call 911," was unreal, you know.
Wow, well, just amazing to hear that story. We heard them say, look, everyone has heard of Jayme out here. They've seen her picture on TV for months. She came into the house and said, "I'm Jayme, called 911. They were in shock. Well, joining me now live via Skype is one of our law and crime experts, criminal defense attorney Marni Snyder. Marni, Joe, thanks so much for being with us. So first of all, this story, thanks again. This story is unbelievable, but it seems like it's one we've seen before in other forms. In fact, everyone thinks, oh, this is the next Elizabeth Smart, right? Elizabeth Smart actually commented on this case today. But what do you make of the fact that this 13-year-old girl, after apparently being held hostage for 3 months, is able to just get out and flag down a neighbor?
Yeah, she is obviously very brave and very resilient, and these stories are really interesting for that reason. We're glad that she's okay, and she's going to get to confront the person that did this to her at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the people we just heard from, Gene Nutter, the woman who she first approached walking her dog, is a social worker who works with children a lot. And so in one sense, she certainly found the right person. Not to say that anyone else wouldn't have helped her, but this was someone who sort of knew how to maybe approach her or deal with her so as not to scare her away or something like that.
Right, and that's really important because her initial report and the words that she says are going to be very important for lawyers at a trial, but it's also, she's traumatized. How could you not be? And so it's really important that she made contact with someone who can translate, whatever trauma she was going through at that moment to get some details to give to 911. That is going to be important later on.
Yeah, I mean, and one more quick question before we move on. How soon, obviously the investigation has been underway for months since she was missing, but in a case involving a child who was likely so very traumatized, how soon do detectives really start interrogating and trying to get information from her?
It's hard because they're going to want to start to get it right away, except sometimes for a victim, and sometimes for victims of sexual abuse and sexual assault too, there's a bit of survivor's guilt, self-blame, and all of those things that go into the way that details are colored. So they might want to take a statement now, and then they might want to supplement that statement later. And they have to be careful that there are no factual inconsistencies between the two, but really if she's kind of processing and forming some resilience, that it's obvious why the statement might be colored differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, quite a miracle and amazing that she has been found and is now safe with authorities. And I mentioned before Elizabeth Smart. A lot of people say this reminds them of the Elizabeth Smart case, the 3 women from Cincinnati. Elizabeth Smart actually posted on Instagram about this today, saying what a brave, strong, and powerful survivor about Jayme Closs. She said no matter what may unfold in her story, let's all try to remember this young woman has survived. Whatever other details may surface, the most important will still remain that she is alive. Absolutely. I think that is true. Well, we want to move on to the other big trials we have been following all week long here on the Law and Crime Network. And we're going to start with New Jersey versus Jayme Monell. This is a case we've been talking about now for about a week and a half. Now, Jayme Monell on trial for murdering his estranged wife, Tara O'Shea Watson. She was found stabbed dozens of times left on the floor of her home in New Jersey. Her 12-year-old son witnessed the stabbing, says he saw his father stabbing his mother to death. Some disturbing testimony from him, which we will get to later on in this hour. Court is on recess today, so we are going to start from the beginning. We want to take you back to the prosecutor's opening statement where this case started as they seek to prove that Jayme Monell did murder his estranged wife.
Having heard what Jeremiah says, she then runs into the bedroom and gets her husband out of the bed, who's a long-haul truck driver, James Greer. She gets him up and says, this is what just happened, this is what little Jeremiah just said. They then go down to 7901 Raymond Drive. On the way, another nearby resident, Glenn Atchison, who has some years of experience as an EMT, is contacted. And Glenn tries to make his way to the house as well. So Glenn, Crystal, and James get to the house, 9701 Raymond Drive. And upon going into the house, they discover the horror that had occurred.
So that was part of the prosecutor's opening statement in their case against Jayme Monell, and in it we heard him actually talk about the account of one of the neighbors who came to find Tara's body. This is after Jeremiah Jr., Tara's son, Jeremiah's son, went and told them he had witnessed his father killing his mother. So he does testify later on in this trial, and we will be bringing you that testimony in just a little while. But before we get to that, Marni Snyder, criminal defense attorney, with us via Skype today to talk about this case and others. I mean, the fact, first of all, we have a witness to this murder, right? We usually don't always have an eyewitness. On top of that, this is the couple's 12-year-old son. You know, before the case was really underway last week, we weren't sure whether or not Jeremiah Jr. would be taking the stand or not because the prosecutors didn't really tease it, so to speak, in their opening. But he did, in fact, take the stand. I mean, when you have a witness like this, how compelling is that for the prosecution's case?
I think it actually is going to be very compelling. So while young people sometimes have memory deficiencies, their brains aren't developed, sometimes their witness statements are a little bit different than we would expect or less compelling. That's more when there's not any physical evidence to back it up, right? So if a young child says something happened and there's nothing to prove that it even happened at all, it's quite hard to accept that testimony as being perfect and true. But this is a stabbing. I mean, there is a body, there's physical evidence that someone did this, and there's also going to be a very hard defense that there was a motive for this little boy to lie against his father when his mother's been murdered.
Right, and I mean, I imagine age, of course, makes a big difference. He's not an old teenager, you know, he's right on the cusp at 12, but certainly maybe a bit more mature than had it been the younger sister who had witnessed this, who was much younger at the time. Well, I want to move on to one of those neighbors who then responded to the home, saw Tara's body, and that is Glenn Atchison Jr. He is also a paramedic. He had some EMT experience, so he looked at the body, he saw it, he said, this is, you know, a homicide, immediately call 911, we need more help. Let's take a listen.
Once he got inside, what happened after that?
He opened the front door, and that's when I entered the residence. I looked around and didn't see anything out of place. I looked down, and the only thing that caught my eye out of place was there was Sarah's comforter laying on the living room floor.
And what did you think when you saw that comforter?
From my past experiences, I didn't think anything good could come of it.
Once you saw that blanket on the floor, the comforter on the floor, what did you then do?
I then went to the upper right-hand corner, raised it just enough to where I could look in. What I saw was Miss Tyer's head was turned to the right. I saw minimal blood spatter up the side of her cheek. Eyes wide open, mouth wide open. Skin was pale, cold to the touch. I went to move the jaw and it wouldn't move. I went to reach for a pulse in the carotid area, and my finger went into a gaping hole. I immediately pulled the blanket back, told Jimmy to exit the residence, and Jimmy had been looking over my shoulder. He was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. He dropped me the phone, and he went and exited the residence as he came in. I told the dispatcher what we had. I asked for a BLS and ALS ambulance to respond to the scene to do a pronouncement. Also asked for the crime scene unit and told them I was securing the residence and declaring it a crime scene until they could get there.
All right, one of the three neighbors who were first on scene and saw Tara's body wrapped in the blanket, dead and bloodied on the ground. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will hear from Jeremiah Jr. again, the couple's then 12-year-old son, who says he witnessed his father stabbing his mother to death. We'll be right back. Well, there you heard Jeremiah Monell talk about what he witnessed, and you heard him just say at the end how he heard the gushing of his mother bleeding as she was stabbed. Marni, Joe, just before the break, we were sort of putting some predictions out there about this testimony. What is your take on it so far, and what impact it might have on the jury?
I thought the witness and the prosecutor did an excellent job in this section of testimony. It's obvious that he's very well prepped, but it's obvious that he's prepped in how to answer questions, not in what to say. So, for instance, when he had trouble doing the sound, he knew that he needed to describe using an analogy, and I think that was really great, and that probably came from prosecution's preparation, the right kind, that explains to the jury what he saw, felt, and heard. It was wonderful.
In terms of his disposition, sort of his mood on the stand, I mean, he's not breaking down crying. Of course, we don't see his face exactly, so we can't really judge his body language. But in terms of just sort of the levelness of how he's delivering the answers, is that positive? I mean, would it make a difference if he was more emotional?
I mean, I think that it's something where the prosecutor can either ask him about that in the very beginning of his testimony or at the end, or talk about that in closing argument, because we never know how someone's going to act when they're on the stand. You know, is he trying to be a brave little boy now because he was 12 when it happened and he suddenly had to become, you know, this mature person? Are they going to talk about whether he went to grief counseling or therapy as part of the examination that he's undergoing right now by the attorneys? So there's plenty of reasons why they can explain that to the jury, and I think the jury will be forgiving when it's a young person who lost his mom to, you know, what they're alleging is his father's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we were just looking at one of the murder weapons, one of the two knives used. So what happened after his mother was killed, laying dead on the floor? Well, Jeremiah Sr. went into Jeremiah Jr.'s room. Take a listen.
After you looked away, what did you do?
I climbed in my bed.
And what did you do after you climbed in your bed?
I went under my blanket and started crying.
And what's the next thing you remember after you went under your blankets?
I looked back and moved the curtain a little bit, and I saw my dad. He was smoking.
What kind of cigarettes did your dad smoke?
Marlboro, Menthol.
And what's the next thing you remember after he was smoking a cigarette?
he walked to my room because he heard something, and he saw me awake. And then he started saying, "You should not be awake. You saw it."
Objection. What's the objection?
Oh. Jeremiah, again, what did you hear your father say when you came back into your room?
He said, "You saw it," and he was saying, "You shouldn't have saw it."
Did you say anything to your dad?
I said, "You killed her," and I said that a few times.
What did your dad say after you said that to him?
He said, "You should not have saw it."
What's the next thing that happened after that?
He told me to go to sleep.
And did you go to sleep?
I just went under my blanket and still cried.
You remember seeing your father again that night in your room?
Yes. He woke me up and told me, to go out the back door, and that you're probably going to go with your aunt and uncle. Or aunt or uncle.
Do you know what aunt or uncle he was talking about?
Yeah.
Who?
Actually, more descriptive, he said, you're going to go with Uncle Josh or Uncle Eddie.
And who are they?
Edward John Monell and Joshua Monell.
Jeremiah Jr. talking about how he confronted his father essentially when his father came into his room saying, you killed her, over and over again. But we are going to continue with the Jeremiah Monell trial in just a moment. But first, a quick break. Aaron Keller standing by live in the newsroom right now with a look at what is coming up in the Daily Debrief today. And Aaron, I know you're going to be focusing on Monell, but also the big breaking news out of Wisconsin where Jayme Closs was found alive miraculously after being missing for 3 months.
Exactly, Stacey. Good afternoon. A lot to talk about on the Debrief this evening. We're going to bring you through a full recap of the big stories of the week. We've been covering, of course, the MCSTAY case, largely on the Debrief. We're going to dip, though, as I said, into the Jayme Closs news of the day. It came out late yesterday that she turned up in a neighborhood about 70 miles away from the neighborhood where she disappeared in western Wisconsin. She appears on a street, approaches a woman walking a dog. That woman immediately took her to safety to a neighbor's house. Police were called. Police tracked down the man that young girl, Jayme Closs, says was the one who took her, basically. Official charges, we're still waiting to hear all of them. Additional updates today coming in from law enforcement. We're going to break all that down. Plus, the MCSTAY family murder case out of Southern California. We, of course, have had our executive producer, Kathy Russin, there covering that case for us throughout the week. Chase Merritt, the defendant right there, accused of killing that family of 4. We're going to break down the highlights of this first week in testimony, and in many minds, it's been a bumpy week for the state as that case moves along. We're also going to talk about the Jeremiah Monell case that you're breaking down right now, that critical testimony and very sad testimony from the son who got up on the witness stand and said he witnessed his father seen seated right there in the defendant's chair, stabbing his mother some 40 times. That case will be on the Debrief, as well as the verdict in the Melanie Eam case, which came down late yesterday. She's the Florida woman accused of stabbing her boyfriend to death when he tried to break up with her. All those stories coming up on the Daily Debrief at 5 o'clock Eastern.
Thanks, Aaron. We look forward to it. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, much more on the Jeremiah Monell case. Stick around. So Marni Jo Snyder is still with us via Skype from Philadelphia. You're a criminal defense attorney. We just heard the defense say, basically, look, this was sloppy detective work. The prosecutor's office did not do their due diligence. And now, they decided it was him. They went with that theory. Now they want you to believe that. How, often do we hear this argument where it's really the onus is put on police, on prosecutors for not doing a thorough job in investigating?
I mean, it depends on the jurisdiction, but a lot. Because the burden is on the state to prove who did it. And when they only rely on what the police did and what the police did is sloppy, it's that they haven't found the real killer. The defense has no burden to prove who really did it, but instead what they say is, wow, if they had done a better job, they would have seen that it wasn't Mr. Merritt. And so really it's a great argument, especially if the misrepresentations are material. to really proving the prosecution's case.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot will rest on the evidence of this case, and this was just week one. This case could go for weeks and weeks, so there will be a lot of evidence we see over the course of that time. Well, so far, we also heard from a number of relatives of the MCSTAY family. Coming up after this break, we will be playing you some of that testimony, starting with Joseph MCSTAY's mother. She will talk about her family's disappearance, so stick around. You will not want to miss that. But first, a quick break. When we come back, much more on MCSTAY family murders.